Assalamu alaikum dear students, and welcome to the lecture on report writing skills. Dear students, up till now we have discussed different formats of different reports. We have discussed the formats of memorandum, types of memoranda. Then we have discussed the formats for reports and different types of reports. We also have discussed letters, their types and their formats, and then resumes, their types and their formats. Today, dear students, we are going to discuss some other qualities and virtues that practically that your format of any sort of report should be having in it. You are writing a report, or you are writing a letter, or you are writing a memorandum. Whatever format of a report you are picking up, there are some virtues that should be present over there in that piece of writing. Today we will be discussing, dear students, what strategies should you be adopting if your report, your letter, your message is offering a good news, and what type of strategies should be adopted if your message, whether it is a report or a memorandum or a letter, is offering a bad news. First, you should understand what is a bad news and what is a good news. Dear students, whenever you are devising a message, no doubt that message is being devised for a receiver. Your message will be read by someone or will be heard by someone, and that someone is called the receiver. Now your message will be called a good news message if it is in accordance giving some news or reply or message or information which is in accordance to the wishes of the receiver. Or the other way around, if your message is conveying something which is against the wishes or expectations of your receiver, you call your message a bad news message. Your message is a good news message if it is in accordance with the desire of your receiver, and if it is not fulfilling, or if it is not responding in the way in which your receiver wanted you to respond, then you will be calling it a bad news message. For example, your receiver wanted you to offer a mobile set at a price of 1000 rupees. Now there are two types of replies existing. One saying that offer is not applicable, you cannot offer the mobile in 1000 rupees. When you will be refusing this request, so this message from your side will be a bad news message. And when you will be accepting this request and offering, you will accept to offer this mobile in 1000 rupees, then this will be a good news message for the receiver. So I think it's quite clear what's a good news and what is a bad news. A good news message is the one which is in accordance with the wishes and desires of the receiver, and a bad news message is the one which is in opposition to the wishes and desires of the receiver, against the wishes and desires of the receiver. Now, dear students, as compared to good news messages, you are supposed to be extremely cautious while you are devising a message that is going to convey a bad news to the receiver. Have you not seen in your practical life as well, in your personal lives as well, that whenever you want to share or convey some bad news to some dear ones of yours, you somehow try to camouflage the words in such a way that the news becomes less painful? This courtesy is inbuilt in you. You do not want to hurt your dear ones. Same should be the situation. Same should be the courtesy, dear students, while you are devising a message, especially when it's a bad news. You should be having in your hearts the same courtesy for your receiver, who is not your relative but a human being nonetheless. So dear students, there are some strategies that should be adopted, especially when you are devising a message that is a bad news. What are those strategies? Kindly have a look on the screen. One by one we will be discussing them in detail. Okay. First heading, as you can see on the screen, is consider your audience. Put yourself in the reader's place. This is a very human behavior, that you should be feeling the pain of the other person as well. For example, if it's a bad news and the bad news, you are the person who is going to give the bad news and the other person is the one who is going to receive that bad news, first thing you should be doing it, put yourself in the shoes of the person who is going to receive that bad news. Feel like the person who will be receiving the bad news. Now when you will be feeling from the perspective of the other person, that if you yourself were the receiver of the bad news, then what way would you have expected the other person to break that bad news to you? Would you not feel angry if a bad news will come to you? Would it not be disgusting for you? It will be disgusting for you. Would it not be annoying for you? It will be annoying for you. So there must be a strategy. First strategy is, while you are devising a bad news message for your receiver, devise it keeping in your mind the thought and the behavior and the feeling of the receiver. Thinking yourself as the receiver, at the place of the receiver. Thinking yourself as the one who is receiving the bad news message. Then devise the bad news message. And remember, dear students, always a no. Whenever there is a no, that means a bad news, a refusal from your side. A refusal never means that this is a refusal forever. For example, if you cannot provide this particular facility today, that does not mean that you cannot provide this facility to your receiver tomorrow or day after tomorrow or 2 months later. So that means there is always some positive side existing. You should be focusing on that positive side. Devising your message in such a way that your refusal does not sound to be an utter, bleak, everlasting refusal and no. Similarly, dear students, always keep in your mind that the worst kind, the most damaging no is the one which you never explained. You are conveying a bad news message to your receiver. You are saying that I cannot give it to you. No, you are saying no, but you are not explaining why. This is the most damaging no. Remember one thing in your bad news messages, always give the reason to your receiver why it's not possible. This is the right of your receiver to know why he or she is being refused. Ethically and professionally, this is the right of your receiver, that in your bad news message he or she should know why he or she is being refused. Next point, dear students. Kindly have a look on the screen. Convey the bad news effectively. It says convey the bad news effectively. Yes. Dear students, again I will repeat the same example that in your normal life as well, whenever you are supposed, you have to convey a bad news to some of your dear ones, you somehow try to psychologically prepare them for the bad news. For example, one of my friends was denied a visa to some country, so I had to break that news to her. This was my responsibility somehow. I moved to her, then I started talking like that. Look, when you move abroad, you are away from your relatives, you are away from your friends, and when you are in another country, you cannot find the people talking in your language, you feel isolated. So there is, when it's you feel like all alone in another country, we are blessed that we are living in this country with our loved ones. So I prepared the grounds, and then after a while, after a discussion of some 30 minutes, I told her that she was denied the visa of that country. So I simply psychologically prepared the grounds for her in order to bear that bad news, so that it becomes easier for her to handle it, to absorb it, and to move with it. Same should be the strategy in your messages. So what are the various things that you can do if you psychologically want to minimize the impact of the bad news? One, you should try to allocate minimum space to the bad news section, the bad news sentence in your message. You're having, say, a message of 2 paragraphs. Your bad news must not be more than a single line or 1.5 line. That means you're giving minimum space. In your normal life as well, you, dear students, you might have seen that you do not repeat some bad incident in the life of your friend again and again and again in front of your friend. Why don't you repeat it? Because it will pain her or him. Similarly, keeping the same thing in your mind, the suggestion is that in your messages you should be allocating minimum space to the bad news. And then another very interesting strategy is that do not make the bad news sentence stand alone in the message. Embed that, subordinate that bad news message in a compound or in a complex sentence. I repeat, do not make that bad news sentence stand alone in the message. Try to make that bad news sentence a part of a compound sentence, a part of a complex sentence. How? Kindly have a look on the screen. There is an example in front of you, and that example says, here, my department is already short-handed, so I will need all of my staff for at least the next 2 months. I think there is an employee who has applied for a leave of 1 month or so, and the boss is refusing the leave. But what way? Kindly again, dear students, have a look on the screen. He is not bluntly and straight away saying, no, I cannot give you the leave. He is saying in a compound sentence, have a look on the screen, my department is already short-handed, so I will need all of my staff for at least the next 2 months. This is how you embed the bad news in a compound sentence. Then, dear students, there is one more way of minimizing the impact of the bad news. Kindly have a look on the screen, and that is you embed the bad news in the middle paragraph somewhere. You do not make it the first sentence of the first paragraph or the first sentence of the last paragraph. The middle paragraph is the one that receives the least attention and focus, and you can make the bad news sentence a part of the middle paragraph, or somehow you can go for a parenthetical expression for the bad news sentence. Kindly have a look on the screen. In parenthesis or inverted commas in the middle paragraph, you can embed it like this: our profits, which are down, are only part of the picture. We are discussing, dear students, the different strategies to minimize the impact of the bad news while we are devising a message, constructing a message for a bad news. Whether it's a report, or it's a memorandum, or it's a letter, but there is some sort of bad news that you are opening up, and for that we are discussing the different strategies how to minimize the impact of the bad news for the receiver. We discussed the first two things. Now we are moving to the third thing. Yes, you can do one more thing, that you can use the conditional statements for the bad news. Rather than directly saying no to anything. For example, this key is not available today, just because of one very important document that the receiver should have brought with him or her, and she forgot that. There's one way of saying it, that sorry, we cannot give this key to you today. And the other way is, if we receive the required document, we will be gladly handing over the key to you. So you have given a conditional clause. If, that means you have shown up some possibility, some positive side, some fresh air window to the receiver, that it's not a no forever. On this condition, it's a yes. Have a look on the screen. Another example, when you have more managerial experience, you are welcome to reapply. That means there was a person who applied for the post of the manager in your organization, but somehow he was not selected, and the reason was that he was not having enough managerial experience. Now, one way of saying that thing was that in the bad news message, that sorry, we cannot hire you. But over here, the bleak side was camouflaged and the positive side was highlighted by encouraging indirectly the receiver to improve his or her qualifications, by saying that when you have, kindly have a look on the screen, when you have more managerial experience, you are welcome to reapply. Positive words being used, and at the same time motivating the applicant indirectly to improve the experience, managerial experience. This is the way to embed the bad news in conditional clause statement, and to remove or reduce the impact, the negative impact and pinch of the bad news. Now, dear students, whenever you are breaking some bad news to your audience, Again, this is almost the same point, that there is one thing that can be done and there is one thing that cannot be done. Whenever there is something that cannot be done, this is always accompanied by a thing that can be done. So you should be focusing on what did you do, what can you do, what will you do, rather than on what could not be done, what will not be done, what is not being done. For example, kindly have a look on the screen. One message says that we sell exclusively through retailers and the one nearest you that carries our merchandise is. This is a very good way of saying, breaking a bad news to someone. Whereas in comparison to this statement, kindly have a look on the screen, the parallel negative statement, we are unable to serve you, so please call your nearest dealer. So the same sentence was said in a different way, in a positive way over here in the second line. Kindly have a look on the screen. We sell exclusively through retailers and the one nearest you that carries our merchandise is ABCD. We are trying to learn how to embed the bad news somehow, how to camouflage the impact, negative impact of the bad news, how to minimize the negative impact of the bad news. Different strategies are being discussed. Then dear students, whenever you are breaking a bad news and you know that you are justified in it, you are not supposed to apologize. Apology is not required if you know very well that you are justified in taking that decision. The only thing is that you will be very tactful in opening up that bad news to the receiver, keeping in your mind that the other person is a human being, plus keeping in your mind that it is a part of good professional business communication that you always adopt a tactful expression in order to be successful in the professional life, so that you continue with each other despite having so many bad news sessions in between. And why, by the way, the point is this, why your apology, you should not be apologizing. The reason is that if you have already explained the entire story and still you are apologizing, then this simply shows one thing, that your explanation was not strong, or you do not believe yourself in whatever you have said. Or you needed an apology even after you have explained the entire thing. So it weakens your explanation. That is why apology is not required. Okay. Dear students, there is one very common fashion nowadays, that whenever there are some colleagues who want to refuse something to someone, that means simply write a bad news message for a customer, they simply try to hide it, or that means they simply try to cushion the bad news, taking the support of the, kindly have a look on the screen, taking the support of the company's policy. That means they are not taking the responsibility on their own shoulders or on their own decision making capability, rather they need the support of the company's policy in order to support their decision. That means their decision in itself was having nothing in itself, was having no logic in itself. The company's policy itself might be the hindrance, but it should not be the company's policy that should be highlighted, that this was because of the company's policy that we couldn't do it. It should be the logic behind that policy that you should be supporting, that you should be coming up with in the bad news message. So always rely on the logic. Come up with the logic. Do not seek the support from this policy, that policy, that policy. Do not try to hide behind the policy. in your bad news message, even if it is a policy. Yes, kindly have a look on the screen. Next point, that whenever you are opening up some bad news, you should make it sure, you should be confident that your audience or your receiver understands what you're saying. Why am I saying that? The reason is this, that sometimes you overemphasize on the explanation or on the positive side of the bad news in such a way that your receiver might get confused that I think it's not a no, it's a yes. This is not on. This is dishonesty. You should be tactful, but you should be honestly tactful, not playing the double games. You should make your receiver understand what is the meaning very clearly, but in a tactful way. You should not be deceiving your receiver through the play of the words, game of the words. Being tactful never means to dramatize. Being tactful simply means coming up with the logic in a soft way. So your receiver should clearly understand what do you mean by this message, whatever you have written in your bad news message. Okay, dear students, let us have some examples in front of us. Comparisons. I must refuse your request. It's not a good way to add up a line in your bad news message. You can say the same thing, I will be out of town on the day you need me. It's a better way to say the same thing. It's quite clear that the person will not be available on that day, but the way to say it is, I will be out of town on the day you need me. We must deny your application, your applicant. One way of saying the same thing. This is not the appreciated one. This is a blunt way, a harsh way, and the soft and tactful way can be, the position has been filled. Have a look on the screen, dear students. Then I am unable to grant your request. Harsh way and blunt way of saying something, and let us see, are we having any parallel softer way to say the same thing? Yes. Contact us again when you have established 1, 2, 3, 4 conditions. Then we cannot afford to continue the program. The program will conclude on May 1. Rather than saying we cannot afford to continue the program, you are focusing on the negative cannot. Cannot. Kindly say what you can. What you can, the program will conclude on Monday, on May 1, simply. It in itself shows that it cannot be continued. After that, you don't have to use the harsh and the negative toned words. Much as I would like to attend. Next example, I think. We must reject your proposal. The negative and the harsh way of saying something, and the parallel positive and a tactful and a softer way can be, we have accepted the proposal from AAA Builders. It automatically shows if the other contractor's proposal is accepted, rest are rejected. But you don't have to say that you are rejected. Simply tell them they are accepted. Then we must turn down your extension request. Negative and harsh way. Softer way, please send in your payment by June 14. That means the payment was not made, because of which the extension request was being turned down. And so rather than saying that we cannot, we must turn down your extension request, you can say the same thing in a tactful and yet meaningful way. Please send in your payment by June 14. Now, dear students, in your normal life as well, have you ever seen a crying baby? And for example, he is crying for one toy. say this is the toy. You cannot give the baby this toy, but there is one thing that you always do, mothers always do, that they offer the child, okay, take this, okay, if it's not possible, then kindly take this. You offer other toys and other alternatives to the child, and normally the child gets specified with the other alternatives. So dear students, whenever you are breaking or writing, giving a bad news in your messages to the customers, so always think on this line that can you offer some alternative? If you have refused one, so is there any other alternative that you can offer through your message? If possible, always show that alternative to your receiver in your message. That is a very, very positive sign. Then, dear students, always begin your letters effectively. I have already communicated that to you, that whenever in the beginning lectures, that your messages, whatever format you are adopting, should not be beginning with the words like I and we. Bad news messages especially should not be started with I and we. They should always be focusing on the audience, on the receiver, on the reader, on the person who is going to hear it. So when you start the bad news messages again with I and we, it becomes all the more pinching. Avoid beginning your bad news messages, rather all the messages, with I and we. Then dear students, your bad news message must always be having a very polite closure. Rather than using this blunt word contact and then giving the contact number, you can always give the headings like call me, email me. Now you are showing ownership through these words, call me, email me, showing the ownership. This is the bad news, but at the same time we are there for you in future as well. The link between you and me is not breaking, it's not broken, it will continue forever. Contact me, showing ownership again. Email me. Okay, dear students, having a an overview of whatever we discussed about the bad news messages today, kindly have a look on the screen. Number one, these are the different parts, sections that your bad news message might have or is recommended to have in it. One, kindly have a look on the screen, the buffer. Number two, explanation and analysis of the circumstances. And number three, alternatives. And number four, positive friendly closure. I repeat, buffer, explanation or analysis of the circumstances, then alternatives, and after that positive friendly closure. What is a buffer? Again, repeating, dear students, a buffer is a statement that is trying to cover the negative news somehow. You should not be directly beginning your bad news message with the negative message. You should be beginning it with some sort of appreciation of the past work, or some sort of sympathy, or some sort of courtesy remarks, or some previous good news, or some assurances of understanding. So this is a buffer. You will be buffering the bad news in the beginning of your bad news message. You should always begin with appreciation and some good news that might have been between you people in the past, or that is still the part of the current bad news, that can be the part of the current bad news. Any courtesy remarks any detail of mutual understanding, assurance. So begin with a buffer. After that, dear students, the next step again is not the bad news itself. The next step in a bad news message will be the explanation and analysis of the circumstances that led to that bad news. How? Have a look on the screen. Provide the needed detail, answer to all the questions, and tactful and logical statement for reasons, details about the requirements, and details about what is wrong. When you will be providing all these things, this will make the background of your explanation, that what can be the different questions in the mind of the customer who is being refused something. So your explanation must beforehand give that answer, the answer to all those questions that might be there in the mind of the receiver. Then, dear students, your statements, you should be giving some logical and tactful statements, that logically the reasoning that I am giving is true. These are the facts and these are the figures, and logic says that our decision that we are going to just open up after a few lines is a correct one. And then details about the requirement and details about what was wrong. Then the next point, give pertinent and tactful, favorable then unfavorable facts as we discussed in detail. Then embed bad news, and we have discussed it already, that you are supposed to embed the bad news somehow. You can use the compound sentences, giving it a minimum space, giving it a conditional clause. There are many strategies and there are many ways to embed the bad news somehow, somewhere. You can use it in the middle paragraph. Yes. The next point, dear students, is the alternatives. Discussing the alternative that I have already discussed with you, that if you cannot offer this thing, that is there any other thing that you can offer. If you are having the alternatives, then do add those alternatives in the bad news message. That will be a very good gesture from your side, and that will help you people continue with each other for a longer span of time. Give helpful counter proposals and alternatives, ideas for getting needed help, possible future changes, sales promotion, and other products and options available. Last point, just on the fourth and a very important part, is positive and friendly closure. Beginning and ending of any message is extremely important, and this is the ending of a bad news message. So you should be paying a special focus to the ending of a bad news message. It should be positive, it should be a friendly closure. How? What are the various things that you can add up in this ending portion in order to give it a friendly and positive closure? Kindly have a look on the screen. You can again come up with some sort of appreciation, that we appreciate your cooperation for the last 10 years that you have been showing with us, or we appreciate the hard work that you have been doing with us, or we appreciate the 3 new branches that you helped us to open in a shorter span of time. So appreciation can be of anything, that any positive thing that ever happened between you and that person for whom at the moment you are having a bad news. Yes. And then you can give the invitation for the future action. If not today, it can be tomorrow. So the doors are open. You are just telling the person that our doors are always open for you. These are not closed. This no is not a permanent no. Then provide easy action and motivation. How can you show this motivation element? You can attach up or add up with your bad news message, dear students, reply form and envelope enclosed. This is a very positive gesture, that you are giving that much importance to your receiver that you are even facilitating that person to reply back by enclosing the reply form or the envelope, so that it becomes easier for him to reply back, and it is a gesture that we do not want to end up. We want to continue with you. That is why we are sending the reply form and an envelope, so that you can come back to us and we can continue further. Then dear students, it's a very important point that when it's a bad news message, yes, you can write. If you're having some questions, then you are, please call me, and but for most of the times avoid using this statement, especially in the bad news, unless and until you feel or you are willing to explain further the reasons for that refusal. If you're already done with it, you have thoroughly done it, and you do not think that there might be any questions, then simply replace this statement by look forward statement, like we look forward to your next order, in place of if you have any questions, please call me. You are supposed to move the next step. It depends on the situation, by the way. It's optional. The recommendation normally is that end up your bad news messages with look forward stance. That would be better as compared to if you have any questions, please call me, unless and until you are willing to explain the reasons for the bad news again, which you have already done. That means you will be stuck somewhere at the same place, whereas the requirement is to move forward. Okay, dear students, in front of you it's a side-by-side comparison of the direct and indirect approaches. That means of the good news and bad news approaches. Direct approach is for good news, indirect approach is for a bad news. Kindly have a look on the screen. Request or good news. When it's a direct approach, when it's a good news, the message will be beginning directly with a good news. And if it is a bad news, kindly have a look on the other side. It will be beginning not with the bad news, it will be beginning with the buffer. Then dear students, in the direct approach, after the good news will be the place for the main ideas, whereas in the bad news, after the buffer will be the indirect and tactful and embedded bad news at there in the middle paragraph, second place, with reasons and alternatives if possible. Okay, now again moving back to the good news side, the last part in the good news, the enclosure, simply the closure, not enclosure, I repeat, the closure for the good news messages normally should be polite closure, encouraging questions. For the direct and good news messages, the closure, I again am wrongly using the word enclosure, it's the closure. The closure should be with a gesture of encouragement for questions. Whereas in the case of the bad news, the indirect approach should be having an ending, applied closure of looking forward rather than questions. This is not a very hard and fast rule that you cannot ask for questions in the bad news, but the recommendation is this: in case of the bad news or indirect style, and you adopt the indirect style in case of the bad news messages, by the way, you should normally end up with look forward gesture. Have a look again. This is what we discussed today. Now dear students, let us move to one example. Dear students, this is a letter written, and in front of you and it's a letter for a bad news, but it is written in the worst possible way. Let us analyze this letter, that whether this letter is following our recommendations or not for the bad news style. It starts with Tyler's Tulips, 777 Tiny Town Road, Texas 22210. And over here, Ronnie Nursery, Mr. Tyler Brown, 14414 Place, New York, NY 11413. Dear Tyler, we regret to inform you that due to the changes in your financial status this year, we have sufficient reason to believe that you will not be able to maintain the credit in good standing with us. Dear students, this is the worst way to start a bad news message. First of all, the person is breaking the bad news without a buffer in the beginning. Whereas over here, the recommendation was that a bad news message should always start with a buffer, some appreciation, some previous mutual understanding lines, some good gestures. Over here, the person is straight away starting with the bad news, and that too with focusing on the word we. That is not recommended for a bad news message. This is not courteous at all. Simply focusing on myself, focusing on I, focusing on my own benefit, not focusing on the other person, the recipient, the feelings of the other person. So this is an I attitude, whereas the focus should have been on you. We regret to inform you, again the negative word being used, the word regret. We regret to inform you that due to the changes in your financial status this year, we, again the word we, have sufficient reason to believe that you will not be able to maintain the credit in good standing with, again, us. Next, therefore we are no longer able to extend your credit. Again the word no, again the word we. And the recommendation was that minimum space to be allocated. You know, when we discussed that, dear students, you should try to embed the bad news. And one way of embedding the bad news was give it the minimum space. But is this the minimum space being given? First two lines dedicated to the bad news with a long sentence, and then the second line also dedicated to the same bad news, continuing with the description of the bad news. Then again the third line, we will only accept cash for any orders you make in the future. Again, for future as well, focusing on only what we can do for you in future, that we will be only accepting any orders from you that will be coming in cash. Again, this is not courteous at all. Then we are sorry for inconvenience. When you are going for an apology, dear students, in a bad news message, that itself shows that your logic and your reasoning was so weak that you needed to apologize. This sentence itself is showing that the logic of this bad news message is so weak that it required the support of an apology. Not recommended. However, as your financial status improves, we will be happy to re-establish your credit with us. Again, the focus on we. Then call if there are any questions or concerns. And dear students, this, when you say call if there are any questions or concerns, remember one thing, that whenever you want to show some courteous invitation of putting the questions to be put by your receiver to you, this is not the way to say call if there are. You always say please call. Then if there are, the term there are is not recommended. If you have any questions, and do not give any generalized invitation, you should be giving the name of the person whom the receiver should contact. Then that shows that actually you mean your statement, you mean your words, you really mean it, whatever you are saying, you mean it. But over here, this generalized statement, if there are any questions or concerns, call if there are any questions or concerns, as if it was a sentence just said for the sake of a sentence. An invitation that was never meant, a support that was never meant, a word for the sake of word only. No courtesy with the word please. Then you will find you cannot find over there in this sentence the name of any person whom the recipient should call. So this sentence itself shows that it's not meant. Then dear students, over here, the spelling of the word sincerely itself shows the casual attitude of the company and the employees of the company. Then over here there is a name, but the signatures are missing. Rhonda Morgan, the owner, but she did not bother to sign this document, and that shows professionally that she is not ready to take the responsibility of the statement that she is giving in this bad news message. Then dear students, the letter format that is being followed is also an incorrect letter format. Have a look, date on this side. Indenting style also not proper. So everything over here is immature. So dear student, this is an example of a bad message in front of you, a worst bad news message in front of you, and it could have been written in a better way. Here in front of you, dear students, kindly have a look. Now this is a revised and improved version of the same bad news message. Kindly have a look. Again, Tyler Tulips 777 Tiny Town Road, Tejeda, Texas 22210. Then Ronnie Nursery, Mr. Tyler Brown 14414 Place, New York, NY 1411413. Then dear Tyler. After that, over the years, Ronnie Nursery has been a valued customer. Now this is a buffer statement, dear students. They are recognizing and appreciating many years long link of this organization with Ronnie's nursery organization. This is the buffer statement, and again very positive words like valued customer. Over the years, Ronnie's nursery has been a valued customer. This is the buffer statement. This is the right way to start a message that tends to be a bad news message. You never start the bad news message directly with the bad news. You start with the buffer statement. This is the buffer statement. Then after that, however, because of several late payment bills, see attached copies, all future orders must be made by cash only. Now this is the explanation, dear students. Very tactfully they are opening up the news but giving the reason. The reason is because several payment bills However, because of the several late payment bills, pending payment bills, the payment in future can be in cash only. Very tactfully, they are opening up the bad news, but in a very honest way as well, so that the reader exactly knows what is happening, but the impact of the bad news is being minimized. After that, we understand that the economy has adversely affected so many small businesses. However, you can understand that we must be able to collect payment on a timely basis. Like you, we also have bills to pay. Again, lines are appealing to the reader's sense of fair play, explaining, giving the logic, giving the arguments, showing the detail, that these are the reasons, this is the background, this is why we have to do it. Then, your preferred status will be restored after a positive record of payment is re-established. If you have any questions, please call our credit manager, Jerry Akiona, at 213-123-4567. Now this is a very polite way, a look forward clause, dear students, in which you are saying that if you're not saying call like the blunt. Kindly compare these two lines over here. Have a look on the screen, dear students. The last line, call if there are any questions or concerns, and over here have a look at this last line. If you have any questions, please call our credit manager Jerry at 213-123-4567, giving the name of the person to be contacted, giving the contact number of the person to be contacted, and then using the courtesy word please, and then not using the words like if there are. Simply if you have any questions, directly talking to that person, addressing that person directly. If you then, dear students, this is an example of the same letter, bad news letter, but the improved version of it. This is a proper way of opening up a bad news as comparison to the message, the letter over here, which is written in a totally non-professional, discourteous and in such a style that will not be helping the business to move forward, or that will never help to win the customers or carry on with the same customer in future as well with the same goodwill. That means goodwill with such messages, with such letters, are literally killed between the two parties, whereas over here with such messages which are drafted in a very professional, tactful and courteous way, even the bad news will not let the relation die. So dear students, I'm sure that you people have benefited. We will be in the next lecture discussing some more examples of some bad news messages and some good news messages. Till then, wishing you best of luck in all the good things of life. Do pray for me. We'll see you inshallah in the next lecture. Till then, Allah Hafiz.